Welcome back to Question Period. Things appear to have gone from bad to worse for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau this week. It kicked off with another by-election loss in a Liberal stronghold, this time in Montreal. Then Transport Minister Pablo Rodriguez announced he was stepping down as minister and as Quebec lieutenant as he launches a bid for the leadership of the Quebec Liberal Party. That announcement wasn't unexpected, but his decision to remain as an independent MP came somewhat as a surprise.
I have also decided to sit as an independent MP until the launch of the leadership campaign next January. This is in order to avoid a costly by-elections a few weeks or months before a general election.
Now, sources have confirmed to CTV News that plans are underway for a bigger shuffle in the next few months, with more cabinet ministers weighing their own decisions about their future. Here to dig into all of that is our Sunday strategy session. Corey Teneycke was Ontario Premier Doug Ford's campaign manager and former Director of Communications for Prime Minister Stephen Harper. Kathleen Monk is a former NDP strategist and Director of Communications to the late Jack Layton. And Scott Reid is a CTV News political analyst and former Communications Director to Prime Minister Paul Martin. Hi, everybody. Good to see you. Let's quickly, last time we met, we talked about looking ahead to the by-election. Scott, I'll start with you. A lot of effort from the Liberals this week to downplay how big of a deal it was. In your view, how big of a deal was it, or is it?
It is a big deal. I mean, you know, it feels like the air is coming out of the bicycle tire of the government, and you can just see it in people's faces, and you can read it in their body language. And so the fact that bad news is expected still doesn't necessarily help you when the bad news arrives. And I really did think that you could feel the sense of resignation on the part of a lot of cabinet ministers, and particularly caucus members. People sort of shrug their shoulders and say things like, with their face, well, that's where we're at now, man. That's how this cookie crumbles. So again, the persistent question for the Liberals isn't how bad is it now? It's bad. The question is, how do you get out of it? What's the path to victory? What's the path to even being competitive again? And, you know, we're going to work hard and we're going to keep delivering is the only message note from the government, and that's cutting zero, and with anyone internally, and certainly it's cutting zero with the public.
When we were gathered on radio, Kathleen, this week, Scott mentioned that he had heard it wasn't even talked about, that the by-election outcome wasn't even mentioned in caucus. I reached out to a number of MPs and they confirmed, like, not a word, and they were flabbergasted by that. What does that say to you?
I think in some ways they're shocked that this bad news keeps on coming, but I don't know why. For over a year, we've been saying to Liberals, like, turn the ship around. Where's the narrative? What's the policy that's going to correct these polling numbers? And we haven't seen that from them. And I wonder, I was thinking about this last night. Does it go back to 2015 when Justin Trudeau was first elected and his staff team and complement that he surrounded himself were really just like loyal implementers? They weren't presenting like kind of a team of rivals, right? They purposely ousted people, you know, like Scott, the Martin crew, other crews, the Chrétien crews, older Liberals that would have had that challenge function, right? That challenge function at the table, that critical thinking to push back. And I wonder if it's there both from the cabinet table, from the staff table, to actually develop that plan, because we didn't see it. And then we did see almost, you know, a really defeated Justin Trudeau earlier in the week in cabinet ins. And then again, the silence that happened at caucus. I think the question that, you know, we have to be asking ourselves now going into the week ahead is, what more bad news comes for the Liberals, right? Because it's just like they just keep on getting hit by it time and time again.
Well, Corey, you've been on the inside of a government.
Just a fact check.
Yeah, I know you weren't
just
ousted.
She
means people who have pushed back were.
I'd been on Exile Island for 10 years by 2015. I just want to make that clear.
But you weren't drawn back in. That's the thing.
Got it. I think you're referencing the fact that there was in 2015, they remember the message was not your grandfather's Liberal Party, right? Like they went out of their way to surround themselves with people who had a different vision than perhaps the party had held in the past. Corey, I just wanted to touch on sort of Kathleen's last point. You've been on the inside of a government in the last, you know, iteration of it, and I was reminded this week, particularly with Rodriguez's exit, thinking back to Seamus O'Regan, of covering in 2014 and 2015 the Harper government when John Baird left and Jason Kenney left. At the time, you didn't know what it signified, but in retrospect, it was the air letting out of the tire. Is that your sense right now?
I think it is, although there's a bit of a difference in those two situations. The Conservatives were stalled at, you know, in the low 30s and really didn't move in 2015. But in the low 30s, you know, you can, you know, look yourself in the mirror and convince yourself that there's a path to victory at that level of support. it's very difficult when you're at like 21, 22 points to look yourself in the mirror and say there's a path to victory. And so, yeah, I think the dynamic is very similar, Vashi, but like I think the degree to which it's obvious that the things are not going to work out well for these guys unless something very radical changes is obvious to everyone except maybe one or two people. And clearly one of them is the Prime Minister himself, who seems to live in what Steve Jobs used to be described as a reality distortion zone. Like it's just absolutely mind-boggling that you could have a caucus meeting and not talk about losing one of the safest seats in the country. Crazy.
Scott, when it comes to the possibility or the probability of doing what the three of you are talking about and what I feel like we've been talking about for 18 months, putting forward something on the table that is dramatically different if you're going to keep the Prime Minister in his position, there's still no signals that's going to be the case. They really seem to be bent on the idea that the contrast between them and the Conservatives will serve them well in the general election.
Well, and I think that's why you do feel a note of resignation among a lot of Liberals and even caucus members, because there is no effort to describe or characterize or portray a path to victory. And so you get this, we're going to work hard, we're going to do better, we're going to listen harder. And what? The Canadian electorate that keeps expressing its disapproval will somehow turn around. And so you do hear rumors that after the election in the United States, the presidential election, that they may shuffle cabinet. Maybe that will give them an opportunity to change the script up. But fundamentally, I go back to the analogy. It does feel like the air is leaking out of the tire. It doesn't feel like they have a pump handy. And that leaves the government at a real disadvantage, not just in terms of capturing the imagination of the public, but even in terms of rallying its own kind.
Do you think
Yeah,
go ahead.
Can I jump in on that? Because I am one other element of that by-election that just I can't get my head around. Ultimately, the Liberals only lost by a few hundred votes, and the Prime Minister chose to spend the last couple of weeks gallivanting around at the TIFF Film Festival and things like that instead of in the riding. It would have been a bad signal for them to narrowly win a safe seat.
Come on,
but it's
Corey.
much,
You know damn well if
much
he'd been in that riding, he'd be losing votes for the Liberals, not winning them. That's the truth of the matter, and that's the uncomfortable reality for them now.
If that's true, then that's even worse. But I got to think that at a victory that close, you pull out all the stops, and if in Montreal of all places, the Prime Minister is so unpopular that hiding him on a red carpet in Toronto is better than having him campaign in his hometown, then all is truly lost for his leadership. It's just mind-blowing.
But I think just jumping off that, and last word to you, Kathleen, the point that Scott made is accurate, right? I think there was a sense, and there was some reporting around the local candidate even to this effect, that aligning herself with Justin Trudeau or making Justin Trudeau the center of that campaign would work to their detriment. But it does speak also to what Corey's saying, where there's been a few instances where that's the case now. Why doesn't, it remains perplexing that that's not being internalized.
The Liberal strategy is perplexing and has been for the last year. Their numbers have been down for the last year. Why haven't they been able to come up with any strategy or any narrative that would change beyond the we're going to work harder, like Scott said? I think the political brinkmanship that we're going to see in the weeks ahead it is almost comical. We see the Liberals who have said, we're dead in the water. That means the NDP should give up. And then you see the Conservatives saying, we've got momentum. The NDP should give up, because they're our only obstacle. It's all ridiculous. All parties should be working in the House to get things done. And New Democrats are going to do that too. And that means, yes, it means when Yves-Francois Blanchet calls Justin Trudeau a viper, he gets to vote for Trudeau too. That's how Westminster parliamentary system works. But that brinkmanship is going to be interesting. And I think the biggest tell in the strategy, and I'm glad I got the last word today, is that Corey and the Conservatives are attacking New Democrats like we've never seen before. Why? Because we're the one obstacle actually for them getting a full massive majority, and they can see that potentially the pull-up. We held Elmwood-Transcona, we brought up our vote in Montreal, and we'll see what happens in the weeks to come.
I mean, I'll be the last word. To be fair, I think the NDP are getting a lot of focus also because they called Justin Trudeau weak and selfish, and now they're voting to keep him in the same position. But I'm just adding that one little caveat. I got to leave it there. Lucky I get to give myself the last word. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.